The courtroom was quiet, too quiet. The buzz of whispers from the audience faded as the bailiff's voice echoed, "All rise for Judge Julie Matthews." She walked in with her signature authority, chin high, black robe crisp, eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. The case file in front of her read, Richard Evans versus Angela Monroe, petition for restitution of child support. The air was heavy with curiosity. 18 years of child support. And now, DNA results that threatened to shatter everything. Judge Julia took her seat. "Be seated," she said, eyes scanning both sides. To her left sat Richard Evans, a man in his late 40s, dressed in a plain navy suit. His hands were trembling slightly, but his jaw was set. Across from him sat Angela Monroe, early 40s, face tight with restrained anger. Julia adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Evans, you've petitioned this court to have 18 years of child support reimbursed on the grounds of new evidence. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Richard said, his voice low but steady. "I just found out, the son I've been supporting, he's not mine." A murmur swept through the room. Julia tapped her pen once, signaling silence. Angela crossed her arms. "That's ridiculous. He's just trying to humiliate me after all these years." Judge Julia leaned forward. "Ms. Monroe, you will have your turn. For now, Mr. Evans, continue." Richard took a breath. "For 18 years, I paid. On time. Every month. I never complained. I missed birthdays because I was working extra shifts to keep up with support payments. And then, 2 months ago, my son, no, the boy I thought was my son, came to me asking about our blood type for a school project. It didn't match." Gasps. Even the court reporter paused mid-typing. Julia raised an eyebrow. "And what did you do?" "I got a DNA test, Your Honor." Quietly. "I didn't want to believe it. I prayed it was a mistake." He pulled out an envelope and held it up. "This is the result." Julia motioned for the bailiff to take it. The courtroom watched as she opened the file, eyes scanning the lines of printed data. She looked up slowly. Probability of paternity, 0%. The words hit like a hammer. Richard's eyes watered. Angela looked away. Julia's tone hardened. "Ms. Monroe, is this accurate?" Angela hesitated. "Your Honor, it's complicated." Julia frowned. "Try me." "I was young," Angela said, her voice shaking. "Richard and I were dating. Things weren't serious. I made a mistake before we got married. But he wanted to be a father. He said he'd raise the child no matter what." Richard snapped. "I said that because I thought I was the father." The courtroom erupted again. Julia banged her gavel. "Order." Richard continued, his voice rising with years of buried pain. "Do you have any idea what it's like to look at a child every day and think he's yours? To feel proud, to work yourself to the bone, to be told you're his hero, and then find out you were just a paycheck?" Angela's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, I never meant for it to happen like that." "Then what did you mean, Angela?" Julia cut in sharply. "Enough. This is a courtroom, not a shouting match." But the emotion was spilling over. The story was already out of control. Judge Julia sighed, then looked at Richard. "You're asking for 18 years of payments to be returned. Do you understand that this court doesn't typically allow reimbursement for support already paid?" "Yes, Your Honor. But this isn't typical. This is fraud." Julia nodded slowly. "You're alleging fraud." Richard leaned forward. "I'm alleging betrayal, Your Honor. Financially, emotionally, legally, every way a man can be betrayed." The judge let silence linger. "Ms. Monroe, do you have anything to say before we proceed to evidence?" Angela wiped her face. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. But I didn't do it out of malice. I thought I was doing what's best for my child. For both of them. Richard was stable, kind, reliable. The other man, he was gone. I thought Richard could give our son the life he deserved." Julia tilted her head. "So you made that decision for everyone else, didn't you?" Angela's lips quivered. "I didn't want to ruin anything. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Too late. It's never too late for the truth." Julia's tone cut through the noise. If either of you raises your voice again, I'll clear this courtroom." Silence. The judge turned toward the gallery. This case isn't just about money. It's about trust. It's about deception that spanned nearly 2 decades. But before I make any rulings, I want to understand why this deception lasted so long. She looked straight at Angela. Why now, Ms. Monroe? Why let him find out through a DNA test instead of coming clean yourself? Angela's voice broke. Because I didn't think he'd still love the boy if he knew. Richard's face softened, just for a moment. "Of course I love him," he said quietly. "But I deserved the truth." Julia sat back in her chair, the weight of years of pain hanging in the air. "Court will recess for 10 minutes. When we return, we'll discuss the financial implications." She stood and exited, leaving behind a courtroom that felt like it had just exhaled decades of secrets. The echo of the gavel still haunted the walls when Judge Julia returned. 10 minutes had passed, but the air hadn't cleared, it had thickened. The quiet murmurs died instantly as she took a seat, her gaze steady, sharp, and unreadable. "Court is back in session," the bailiff announced. Julia adjusted her files, tapped her pen twice, and looked directly at Angela Monroe. "Ms. Monroe, before we proceed, I need you to answer a direct question. Did you knowingly allow Mr. Evans to believe he was the father for 18 years? Angela's hands trembled. "Your Honor, I didn't plan to deceive him forever. I just—" "Answer the question." "Yes," Angela whispered, almost inaudibly. "Yes, I did." A low gasp swept through the courtroom. Julia's expression hardened like stone. "Then let me be very clear, Ms. Monroe," she said, her tone deliberate. "That is not just immoral, it's potentially criminal. Deception of this magnitude, sustained over years, with financial and emotional consequences, can be grounds for restitution, and possibly fraud charges." Angela's eyes widened. "Criminal? I never meant." Richard interrupted, his voice cold. "You didn't mean? 18 years. Angela, you took 18 years from me." Julia raised a hand, silencing the room. "Mr. Evans, I understand your anger, but I need facts, not fury." Richard nodded, swallowing hard. "Facts? Fine. The facts are, she told me I was the father. She took my money, my time, my love, and she lied. I have proof of every payment, every check, every court order I obeyed." He slid a stack of folders across the table. Julia glanced through them, bank receipts, wage garnishments, even old letters written in a younger, hopeful handwriting. "This man," Richard said, pointing at himself, "never missed a single payment. Even when I lost my job in 2010, even when my mother died. I paid, because I believed it was for my son. My boy." Julia took a breath, then turned to Angela. "Ms. Monroe, you heard the DNA evidence. You've admitted the deception. Do you wish to submit anything in your defense before I move to the next witness?" Angela looked down. Her voice cracked. "Your Honor, I thought I was protecting my son. The man who was his biological father, he was violent. He left when I was 2 months pregnant. I knew Richard would be a good father. I thought I could bury the past." Julia's tone softened slightly. "But the truth doesn't stay buried forever, does it?" Angela's tears spilled freely. "No, Your Honor." The door opened quietly at the back of the courtroom. The bailiff nodded. "Your Honor, the court has approved testimony from the son, Jacob Evans." All eyes turned toward the young man walking in, 19 years old, tall, carrying a nervous kind of maturity. His gaze flickered between the 2 people who raised him. Julia's voice gentled. "Jacob, please take the stand." He did, sitting stiffly, avoiding his mother's eyes. "Jacob," Julia began, "you understand why we are here today?" "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found out 2 months ago that Mr. Evans isn't my biological father." "Mr. Evans," Julia asked, "do you consent to Jacob's testimony?" Richard nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I just want the truth, every part of it." Julia nodded. "Proceed, Jacob. Tell this court what you wish to say." Jacob swallowed. "I grew up thinking my dad, Mr. Evans, was the best man in the world. He worked 2 jobs to make sure I could play baseball. He was there when I broke my arm. He taught me how to drive. And then I found the DNA report. He hesitated, glancing at Richard. He didn't tell me. I found it in his drawer by accident. I confronted Mom, and she just broke down. I didn't know what to do. Angela's tears flowed again, silently. Jacob continued. At first, I was angry, at her, at him, at everything. But then I realized something. It doesn't matter what blood says. He's still my dad. He's the one who was there. He's the one who cared. Richard's eyes glistened. Julia leaned back, emotion flickering across her otherwise composed face. Jacob, she said carefully, your words speak volumes. But this court must also address the financial reality. Mr. Evans paid child support under the belief that he was your biological father. The law recognizes the emotional bond, but it cannot ignore the deception. Jacob turned to his mother. Mom, you have to fix this. You can't just say sorry. Angela broke down completely. I know. I'll pay him back whatever I can. Julia interjected firmly. This isn't about vengeance, Ms. Monroe. It's about accountability. The judge glanced through the case files again, the weight of fairness pressing on her shoulders. Mr. Evans, your petition requests full reimbursement of all paid support. That totals, she paused to read the number, $236,800 over 18 years. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Julia's gaze returned to Angela. Can you pay that back? Angela shook her head. Your Honor, I don't have that kind of money. I can't even begin. Julia raised a hand. I'm not asking what you can't do. I'm asking what you will do. Angela took a shuddering breath. I'll sell the house. I'll liquidate what I can. I'll make payments. I'll do whatever it takes. Richard looked down, then up at Julia. Your Honor, I don't want her to lose everything. I just want acknowledgement. I want this court to recognize what she did, to make sure this never happens to another man. Julia's tone softened. So noted, Mr. Evans. Then she turned to the young man still on the stand. Jacob, before you leave, tell me, how do you feel about all of this now? Jacob looked down for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but trembling. I feel like I've been living in a lie. But I also know that truth doesn't erase love. He's still my dad. And no DNA test can change that. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Even the cameras from the local station capturing the case held still. Julia finally spoke. This court acknowledges that emotional truth, but the legal truth remains. Deception cannot go unpunished. We will reconvene tomorrow for my official ruling. She looked to both parties, her tone final. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. As everyone began to leave, the judge remained still, eyes fixed on the empty witness chair. She whispered softly to herself, unheard by the crowd. Truth always finds its way to the surface, even when buried for 18 years. The courtroom was full before Judge Julia even entered. Reporters whispered in the back rows. The air buzzed with the kind of tension that made people hold their breath. Everyone knew what was coming, a ruling that could change everything. The bailiff stepped forward. All rise. Court is now in session, the Honorable Judge Julia presiding. Julia entered slowly, her robe crisp, her face calm but heavy with thought. She sat, placed her glasses down, and scanned the room. Her eyes landed on Richard Evans and Angela Monroe. Two lives connected by 18 years of a lie. You may be seated, she said. Silence fell. Yesterday, Julia began. This court heard testimony that revealed a deception of nearly 2 decades. Mr. Evans paid over $200,000 in child support under the belief that he was the biological father of Jacob Evans. DNA evidence has proven otherwise. Ms. Monroe admitted under oath that she knew this truth and concealed it. Angela closed her eyes. Richard stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Today, Julia continued, I deliver my ruling. Every sound in the room vanished. Julia lifted a folder, her tone unwavering. This court recognizes the emotional harm, financial loss, and moral injury suffered by Mr. Evans. The deception was deliberate, prolonged, and damaging. However, she paused. We also acknowledge that Jacob Evans is now 19, and throughout his life, Mr. Evans acted as his father in every way that matters. The bond they share is not erased by biology. She looked at Richard. Mr. Evans, the law allows you to seek restitution. But you asked for more than money. You asked for acknowledgement and accountability. Richard nodded slowly. That's right, Your Honor. Julia leaned forward. Then this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Richard Evans. Ms. Monroe is ordered to repay a portion of the financial damages, $80,000, in structured payments over time. Furthermore, her actions are to be referred to the District Attorney's Office for review under fraud statutes. However, this court also recommends that no criminal prosecution proceed if restitution is made in good faith. A stunned silence. Angela's tears fell fast. $80,000. I'll do it. I'll pay, I swear. Richard looked at her for a long time. His face wasn't angry anymore, just tired. I never wanted to ruin your life. I just wanted the truth. Julia nodded. And that truth has been recognized. But then she did something no one expected. However, Julia said, turning to the clerk, this court is not yet finished. There's a matter still unresolved, the identity of Jacob's biological father. Angela froze. Your Honor, please. This court has reviewed supplemental documentation submitted anonymously last night. Julia lifted a sealed envelope. Inside is a sworn statement and a paternity test. Whispers broke out. Reporters leaned forward. Julia opened the file, adjusted her glasses, and read. The test confirms that the biological father of Jacob Evans is one Michael Trent, a former police officer who was dismissed in 2004 for domestic abuse. Angela's face turned white. Julia continued, voice unwavering. This revelation changes the record of this case. If Mr. Trent is alive and in this jurisdiction, he may bear liability for failure to provide child support during the period of concealment. Angela's voice cracked. He can't. He can't be brought into this. Richard turned sharply. You let me pay for his child? A cop who beat you and walked away. Julia raised her gavel. Order in the court. The shouting stopped instantly. Julia's tone softened but remained firm. This court isn't here to shame anyone. It's here to bring the truth into light. That is what justice demands. Angela sat down, trembling. He doesn't even know Jacob exists. Then he will, Julia said, because this court will issue an inquiry to locate him. This deception didn't just hurt one man. It robbed a boy of his right to know where he truly came from. Jacob, who had been sitting silently behind Richard, stood up. Your Honor, if I may. Julia nodded. Go ahead, Jacob. I don't care who that man is. He's nothing to me. My father is right here. He turned to Richard. You're my dad, and nothing changes that. The entire courtroom softened. Julia smiled faintly. You're wise beyond your years, young man. Jacob nodded and sat down, his eyes glistening. Julia turned back to Angela. Ms. Monroe, you made a terrible choice, one that hurt everyone around you. But this court believes in redemption. You'll pay what you owe, you'll cooperate in the inquiry, and you'll accept responsibility for your choices. Angela sobbed quietly. I understand, Your Honor. Julia stood, her robe falling in sharp folds, voice steady and final. Justice isn't always clean. It's rarely kind. But it must always be fair. And today, fairness means facing every truth, no matter how long it was hidden. She raised her gavel one last time. This case is concluded. Crack. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through the room like thunder. Reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed. But Richard didn't move. He sat quietly, watching Angela cry and Jacob staring at both of them. Finally, he stood, walked past the benches, and stopped near Angela. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the years between them hanging like a ghost. I forgive you, Richard said softly. But I won't forget. Angela nodded through tears. That's more than I deserve. He turned to Jacob. Come on, son. Let's go home. Jacob smiled, small but real. As they walked out, Judge Julia watched from the bench, her gavel resting beside her. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving behind only silence, and the faint echo of truth finally set free. And when the doors closed, Julia whispered to herself again, as she always did after every case that mattered. Justice isn't just about law. It's about healing. The courthouse was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Weeks had passed since Judge Julia's gavel brought the Evans case to its dramatic close, or at least, what everyone thought was the close. Then, one morning, an officer walked into Julia's chambers holding a brown envelope. "Judge," he said, "you'll want to see this." Julia opened it. Inside was a police report and a mugshot. The name printed in black ink made her sit back slowly. Michael Trent, the man whose name had been whispered in the courtroom. The man Angela Monroe never wanted found. He was alive. And now, he was in custody. The hearing, 2 weeks later. Julia adjusted her robe and looked over the courtroom. The same faces were there: Richard, Angela, Jacob. But this time, one more seat was filled. Michael Trent sat in the defendant's chair, hands clasped, eyes cold. "Mr. Trent," Julia began, "you have been summoned in connection with Case 04-118, Evans versus Monroe. You were identified as the biological father of Jacob Evans, now 19 years of age. Do you acknowledge this?" Michael smirked faintly. "Yeah, I read the report. So what? I didn't know the kid existed. I owe nobody anything." A murmur of disgust rippled through the courtroom. Julia didn't flinch. The DNA test says otherwise. And ignorance of a child's existence does not erase responsibility. The law requires that you be held accountable for 18 years of unpaid child support. Michael leaned back, arms crossed. "You think I'm paying for a lie she created? She's the one who hid it." He pointed at Angela. "You don't get to drag me into her mess." Angela lowered her head. Her voice cracked. "You were gone, Michael. You hit me. You disappeared." His eyes flared. "You left first." Julia's gavel struck once. "Enough. This is a court of law, not a battlefield of blame." Richard sat quietly, every muscle in his face tight. The man who had unknowingly raised Michael's son now sat feet away from the man who should have. Julia turned to him. "Mr. Evans, you've requested to remain in these proceedings as an interested party. You may address the court." Richard stood. "Your Honor, I'm not here for money. I'm here for the boy. Jacob deserves to know the truth, but he doesn't deserve this chaos." He looked directly at Michael. "You don't get to waltz in here and pretend none of this happened. Here's your blood. Start acting like it." Michael gave a dry laugh. "You think a few courtroom speeches make you the hero? You had your time playing daddy. Move on." Gasps filled the room. Julia's eyes hardened. "Mr. Trent, you will watch your tone. The court does not tolerate contempt or arrogance." Michael looked at her, then smirked again. "With all due respect, Your Honor, you can't force a father-son bond." Julia replied sharply, "No, but the law can force you to be accountable for the life you created." The next witness was called, Jacob Evans himself. He walked to the stand, hand shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. "Your Honor, I've spent my whole life thinking Richard was my dad. He is my dad. But now I know the truth, and I don't know what to do with it." He turned toward Michael. "You were out there. You never tried to find me. You didn't care." Michael's jaw tightened. "Kid, I didn't know." Jacob shook his head. "No, you didn't want to know." The words hung heavy. Julia's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "Mr. Trent, whether or not you knew, the evidence shows you are the biological father. This court cannot rewrite time, but it can determine your duty from this day forward." She paused, then looked at all three of them, Michael, Angela, and Richard. "This case isn't just about money or DNA. It's about truth, consequence, and the choices we make when that truth finally surfaces." After hours of testimony, Julia closed her file. "This court hereby rules that Michael Trent is legally recognized as the biological father of Jacob Evans. As such, he is ordered to pay restitution of $60,000 to Mr. Evans for financial damages incurred due to false paternity, and an additional $20,000 to Ms. Monroe for child-rearing costs after Mr. Evans ceased payments." Michael slammed his hands on the table. "This is ridiculous." Julia's voice was thunder. "Sit down, Mr. Trent." He froze. The entire room went silent. She leaned forward. "You ran from responsibility for nearly 2 decades. Now the law has caught up. You will comply, or this court will ensure compliance through every means available. Richard stood, exhaling deeply. Jacob turned to him, eyes glassy. Angela whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor." But Julia wasn't done. "Before we adjourn, I want one thing made clear. None of you walk out of this courtroom innocent. You all carry your share of the burden. But perhaps, that burden will finally teach what justice truly means." Her gavel struck once. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom emptied, Julia stayed behind, staring at the silent bench. Her clerk approached quietly. "Rough one, huh, Judge?" Julia nodded. Justice doesn't come clean. It comes with scars. And from behind her, the echo of Jacob's voice still lingered. "I don't care about the blood. I care about who stay." The morning after the Trent verdict, the courthouse was supposed to return to its usual rhythm: paperwork, quiet hearings, and routine motions. But not this morning. Judge Julia entered her chambers to find 3 reporters standing outside her door, cameras flashing, questions flying like daggers. "Judge Julia, did you or did you not know Angela Monroe personally before the Evans case?" She froze. What did they just say? Another shouted, "Sources claim you attended the same university and shared legal internships years ago. Is this a conflict of interest?" Her clerk, Matthew, quickly ushered her inside and slammed the door shut. "Judge, we've got a problem," he said, sliding a folder onto her desk. Inside was a printed article, headline bold across the top. "Judge Julia Harrison's secret past with defendant Angela Monroe. Did friendship skew justice?" Julia's heart pounded. This is nonsense. But as she read, her stomach dropped. There was a grainy black and white photograph, her and Angela, decades younger, sitting at a student legal aid booth, smiling at the camera. It was true. The Ethics Review. By noon, Julia was summoned to the Judicial Conduct Office. A senior investigator, Harold Stein, greeted her coldly. "Judge Harrison, due to a potential conflict of interest, we are reviewing your recent ruling in Evans versus Monroe. Until the inquiry concludes, you are placed on temporary suspension." "Suspension?" she repeated, disbelief in her voice. "Harold, that's absurd. I hadn't seen Angela in over 20 years. Harold sighed. "That may be. But perception of bias is enough to compromise public trust. You know that as well as I do." Julia sat in silence. The law she had devoted her life to now stood against her. Meanwhile, the story exploded online. Clips of her intense exchanges with Michael Trent flooded social media. Headlines read, "Hero Judge or Hidden Bias, Justice Harrison's Case Under Fire. Did she protect a friend?" Court gasp moment now under investigation. Richard Evans watched the coverage from home, furious. He slammed the remote down. They're making her the villain when she's the only one who did the right thing. Jacob sat beside him quietly. "Dad, maybe we should tell the truth." Richard frowned. "What truth?" "That Judge Julia didn't protect Angela. She protected me." Angela's visit. Later that evening, as rain tapped against Julia's window, a soft knock came at the door. She opened it to find Angela standing there, soaked, nervous, and holding a small envelope. "Angela," Julia said wearily, "this isn't a good time." Angela stepped forward anyway. "I know, but you're losing everything because of me." She placed the envelope on Julia's desk. Inside is a statement. It says I reached out to you only after the trial started, not before. That we had no contact for decades. It's the truth. Julia looked at her, eyes tired. "And what will people think? That you're trying to cover for me?" Angela shook her head. "Let them think what they want. I've lied enough for one lifetime." She turned to leave, but Julia stopped her. "Angela, do you regret it? Any of it?" Angela hesitated. "Every lie. But not the moment Jacob was born. That boy deserved better, and maybe you were right to make me face that." The secret meeting. That night, Julia received a call from Harold Stein. "Judge Harrison," he said, "there's something you should know. The complaint wasn't filed by a journalist. It came from inside the courthouse." Julia's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "It was filed anonymously, but traced to someone in your courtroom staff." Matthew looked up from his desk across the room. Julia's eyes narrowed. Who would want me off the bench? Harold sighed. Someone who benefits from you being silent. You've ruled against some powerful people, Julia. It might be time to ask who's afraid of your decisions. The courtroom reopens. Days later, a closed-door session convened, not for Julia to preside over, but for her hearing. The same room where she'd handed down justice now held her fate. Harold sat before her. Judge Harrison, are you willing to swear under oath that you had no contact with Angela Monroe prior to the Evans trial? I swear, Julia said firmly. Do you have any documentation to support that? Yes, she replied, placing Angela's letter on the table. A signed statement from Ms. Monroe, and phone records showing no communication between us until the morning of her testimony. Harold reviewed it, nodding slightly. We'll verify these claims. A reporter outside shouted, Judge Harrison, is it true you've lost the bench permanently? Julia paused before walking past the cameras. Justice doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to the truth. And I'll fight for it, even if it means standing on the other side of the bench. Meanwhile, Michael Trent, furious over the verdict and now sensing Julia's vulnerability, contacted a local news station. He appeared on live TV, smirking. She pretended to be impartial, he said. But she was protecting her friend. You all saw how she treated me. This whole case was a setup. The anchor leaned forward. So you believe the ruling was biased? Michael nodded. I don't believe it. I know it. Within hours, the segment went viral. The public turned against Julia. Threats filled her inbox. Editorials demanded her resignation. But Julia wasn't done. She gathered every record, every transcript, message, and video. Then, late one night, she stood in her office and recorded a statement of her own. Justice cannot be bought. It cannot be bullied. And it will not be silenced. My decisions were based on law, not friendship. The people attacking me know why, because they've seen what happens when justice doesn't flinch. She looked straight into the camera. And to the one who filed the false report, I will find you.